our resources, let's join our personnel, let's join our intelligence, and let's go after and try to defund the transnational criminal organizations and their partners working within our jurisdiction. And so now that's grown from initially 8 sheriffs to 44 different law enforcement agencies. By January, we'll be in excess of 50 law enforcement agencies across the state of Texas participating in that task force.
Wow, great development there. And I definitely want to hear more about this, but let's go to Marcos for this next question. 6 countries actually account for the most migrants coming to the U.S. That's Mexico, Guatemala, Venezuela, Cuba, Ecuador, and Colombia. What drives these people there to leave everything they have behind? Give us an idea.
Well, so there are 2 ways to look at this, and that's also why the situation is so complicated. So yes, some of these countries have authoritarian regimes, as is the case in Venezuela and Cuba. I mean, if you get back to Venezuela, it's the largest migration crisis in the world right now, even larger than the Ukraine war, for instance. But there is no war except the war of the ideas of totalitarianism, of socialism, of the local government against its people. Of course, there's also the economic factor. Lots of these people are economic migrants. They're looking out to make a better life for themselves in the United States. Also, what we have to consider is the other part of this equation. When you get into things like asymmetrical warfare, criminal organizations, etc., which is the not so pretty part. For instance, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has an indictment against Nicolas Maduro, the current leader of Venezuela, for a quote-unquote narco-trafficking conspiracy, narco-terrorism conspiracy, to quote-unquote flood the United States with cocaine, which is often done through migrants, which get, all the way from Venezuela into Central America, and then to the southern border. They do that through the cities of Turbo and Nicocli in Colombia, get to the Darien Gap, and then all the way up to Texas and other border states. This happens also with state involvement, and there's just the pure criminal organizations which do that without state involvement. When you talk about state involvement, it's mainly Venezuela we're talking about, but also some other countries in the region. So why are they leaving? There's the legitimate, economic migrants and people fleeing authoritarian regimes, and then there's also, the criminal factor, often with state involvement.
And Sheriff, although this gives me a pretty good idea, but you described Operation Lone Star as a lifeline in the past when you spoke with us. What makes you feel that way?
Well, whenever I came into office in 2021, as soon as Joe Biden was sworn in as the president, we began to see a flood of transnational criminal activity coming to our counties. I'm in a rural South Texas county halfway between Laredo and Houston. We have 7,012 people and a lot more cattle than we have human beings. But what we found was the 1 to 2 deputies that traditionally patrolled Goliad County, which is about 900 square miles, they could no longer keep up with the demands. We were finding ourselves in vehicular pursuits and bailouts with a large number of illegal aliens and smugglers on a regular basis, anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. The demands on the sheriff's office were far more than the sheriff's office was ever designed to handle. And this was causing a huge strain on our personnel and on our equipment and on our community. And so without the intervention of Governor Abbott and the funding from Operation Lone Star Grant, we would not have been able to keep up. But thanks to the governor, we were able to hire 5 additional people for the sheriff's office that do nothing but combat and investigate transnational criminal activity. And that's the Mexican cartels, their contractors, their subcontractors, and their business partners that are operating within the region. And it has made a huge difference in the quality of life for the people in Goliad County and the surrounding counties that have joined our task force.
And Marcos, you just mentioned that different goals, for instance, to flood the U.S. with cocaine. We have seen Tren de Aragua coming in, and they have been in the news with potential gang fights also in Chicago. Tell me more about the transnational criminal threat that is coming from Latin America.
Sure. Well, so this is a really big thing in the region and has been for a while now, of course, drug trafficking. And I mean, just to give an overview to U.S. viewers, Latin America can be a pretty dangerous place in certain regions. I mean, if you get Brazil, for instance, the homicide rate here is so big as to, on certain years, overcome, casualties from countries that are actually at war, like the Ukraine war. If you get the year-on-year casualty rate of the Ukraine war, you see that it's comparable to the murder rate in Brazil, for instance, the country where I live. Of course, it's not all of the region, it's not all of the cities, but it's a pretty big problem. Now, the thing is that Latin America has been the largest producer of cocaine in the world and the largest exporter of cocaine in the world. Cocaine is the big one. There are other drugs as well, but really for the region, cocaine is the big one. Americans will remember, Pablo Escobar from Colombia and other traditional, criminal organizations. Now, when this really gets complicated recently with the southern border, is that with the U.S. as a huge consumer market, which logistically is near enough to make it, a cheap and workable operation to do the drug trafficking over there, lots of these criminal organizations have increasingly expanded their market inside the United States. In the last few years, we've seen the border policies. It's just what the sheriff was saying, right? So the easier it is to get into the United States, the more incentives these criminal organizations have to get in there. Now, it's also worth noting that as governments throughout the region adopt a softer stance on crime, and because the criminal organizations are so old and so big, there's also widespread allegations that they do get inside certain governments in Latin America. So once you see that barrier of entry into this market, lower law enforcement, both in the countries of origin of those drugs, in the countries that they go through, and then also in the southern border with less resources to combat illegal migration, that's where you see these networks really thrive. I also even like to get the sheriff's take on this, because when you talk about the rate from like criminals to economic migrants, what you're seeing on the ground, Sheriff.
So
what I'm seeing is people.
Sheriff, sorry, I want to please hold that thought. I want to drill down on that topic more a little bit later, but now
find is they're charged a certain fee to cross over the river or cross over the border. But then they're taken to a distribution center, which for us would be Houston, which is the main distribution center for the eastern half of the United States for slaves, drugs, and any contraband for the cartels. Once they get there, they're advised that they owe additional money. And at that point, they are entered into indentured servitude, and they are sent off to wherever their destination is across the United States. I have a letter in my desk that articulates that it takes 8 to 13 years to buy your freedom once you are brought into the United States. And so what we're doing is we're bringing in a peon class of people that do not have the opportunity at the American dream of freedom and prosperity, that are having to pay off a debt while living in a one-bedroom apartment with 15 other people and being charged for living in that apartment and all of the utilities that go along with it. And so this is something that we see over and over again. With regards to the trafficking aspects, I'll give you a good example. One of my deputies stopped somebody on a Saturday, had 3 females with them. They were young, they were attractive. All 3 of those females were illegal aliens. They believed they were coming to the United States and were going to be reunited with their families. But our investigation revealed that they were being taken to Chinatown in Houston, where they were going to be put into forced prostitution. And this is something that's happening on a daily basis across the United States that should not be tolerated.
I can only imagine how gut-wrenching some of those stories are. Now, Marcos, I want to go to you. How involved is Brazil when it comes to human trafficking, drug smuggling?
Oh yeah, Brazil is pretty much it's a lot. That's the short answer. And because Brazil is such a huge country, maybe Americans are not that aware of the geography of South America, but Brazil is about 49% of South America, and because it's such a huge country, larger than the contiguous continental U.S. It's larger than the U.S. except Alaska. So it's very hard to enforce the law there. When you get to certain points of the journey some migrants make from South America all the way to the southern border, you're talking about places like the Amazon rainforest, like we briefly mentioned before. So I remember being a kid, and I actually had a guided tour with my family of the Amazon. I've been living here in Brazil since I was born. So, and the thing is that the trees are so dense, they're so close to each other that you can barely see the sun. People who don't know how to get around in there, basically have no chance of surviving. And that also creates a regulatory gray zone, because how do you enforce the law on a place where it's so hard to get by, where you need so much training to know what to do and just to survive? It also has a lot of rivers, which make it really easy to navigate around the region if you know how to do it. And this creates this sort of scenery in which Brazil can become a hub where it's really hard to enforce the law because the territory is so widespread, and the topography of the terrain is so raw. And then when you get into the context in which you have, alongside this whole Amazon region, which is mostly inside Brazil, but you have a bit of it in Peru, a bit of it in Venezuela, a little bit of it in Colombia, Bolivia, etc. You often have regimes that are so much friendly to these criminal organizations, like Maduro. I just mentioned the DOJ involvement, in the previous section of the show. Brazil plays a big role in there because the criminal organizations locally can coordinate with criminal organizations in other countries and make routes of human and drug trafficking possible. That's the long story short.
So, Sheriff, quickly, tell me more about those networks that you were following inside the U.S. When you follow the traces that those criminals leave behind, what do you find there?
What we're finding is that the cartels have developed a stronghold across the United States of America. If you go into Mexico, what you find is that the Mexican government leases territories they call plazas to organized crime. In order for them to conduct their business, they pay a monthly fee plus additional taxes to the Mexican government. The cartels have replicated that system throughout the United States of America. And by doing that, what they've done is they have reduced many of the major gangs across the United States of America, like the Crips, the Bloods, Mexican Mafia, Texas Syndicate, Aryan Brotherhood. Those groups are now merely contractors for the cartels out of Mexico. They are leased territory and provided product in exchange for certain percentage of the sales within that region. So it's almost like a pyramid scheme, but it's been set up all across the United States. And the cartels are the ones who control all of that. And that's what we're seeing. You have the cartels, you have their contractors, you have the subcontractors, you have subcontractors. You also have business partners in the legitimate business world helping to funnel the money and product around through their businesses. And you also have foreign governments like the Communist Chinese Party that are working hand in hand with the Mexican cartels right here in the United States, and some of the Korean organized crime as well. We've recently uncovered the Armenians being involved with the Mexican cartels. So there's a lot of intertwining and activity that is going on. But what it boils down to a huge illicit trade business that's going on and a lot of money laundering across the United States that leads to the victimization of our citizens.
Marcos, do you see this kind of contractors as well in Latin America? And how do Chinese bad actors, for instance, play into this?
Yeah, so I think what the sheriff has brought about is really rich, and he's completely right. And I mean, when you get to some of those criminal organizations, it's not just the fact that they mingle with governments, it's the fact that they are able to an extent, establish parallel administrations within regions of the continent. And with the Chinese, I mean, the cartels are a big player in this, but when you go further down south, you will see partners, like remnants of the FARC in Colombia, which is an armed communist group which disbanded in 2016. Parts of it are still active. You will see the communist guerrillas until we even be working with Middle Eastern terrorist organizations like Hezbollah. When I say that, it's usually shocking because it's unusual, but Hezbollah is really a very big player in Latin America. When you talk about the CCP, about the Chinese Communist Party, that's also a major thing in the region right now. It's something we have to be aware, because just to give you an example, so with Ecuador fell into the CCP's debt trap diplomacy with a lot of big infrastructure projects, Belt and Road style stuff. And once they couldn't pay the debts, they started giving the Chinese, the payment in oil, which is a main national export. But not only that, they also allowed Chinese people to get inside Ecuador without visas. They can stay for 3 months in Ecuador without visas. They actually cut that off a few months back, but they could for a long number of years, since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Next thing you know, these people can get out of Ecuador illegally, which has happened a lot. They can make their way to the Darien Gap and from there on to the southern border. And that's also why we've seen a huge increase of military-aged male Chinese people in a very suspect fashion in the U.S. southern border. I mean, that's really interesting. If you could get the sheriff's comment on the Chinese as well in the border, something I think really plays a big role in this.
Sheriff, I do want to get your comment. I see you're nodding along.
No, he is absolutely right. And what we're finding is the Chinese have a huge presence in the illicit trades across the United States of America. And they're buying up land along the Mexican border in the state of Texas. Out in Val Verde, they've bought huge chunks of land. And they're utilizing this to work with their partners in the cartels to bring people across, but predominantly to bring the Chinese across. And unlike what we're seeing with a lot of other, with a lot of third world countries, China's bringing across people that are a little bit different. We're finding out in West Texas, you've got doctors and engineers, people that are educated that the Chinese are smuggling into this country. And you have to ask yourself, why are they bringing in these people who would obviously qualify for a visa to come into the country legally unless they had something in their past that our government would not like them to be here for? In our county, when I came in, we had what's called
the Chinese Army?
which is basically a game room where it's a bunch of slot machines and it's a really low rent kind of situation in a community of 300 people. And in a matter of a few years, they moved $4 million through their bank accounts in that place. We shut them down and we seized it and worked with the Texas Attorney General's office on the financial side of that investigation and found out that while they were in business, they had moved over $2 million to the partners of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese CCP were the ones that were reaping the benefits of this game room within the county. Of course, we shut it down and don't have any of those anymore. But that's being replicated all across the United States. There's no telling how many billions of dollars are being moved illegally through these various illicit businesses that the CCP is participating in. Because we see that partnership between them and the Mexican cartels, and sometimes even the Mexican government. It has a vast impact on the criminality that we face right here in the United States of America.
Very eye-opening information, and we will continue in just a moment. It's time for a break now. When we return to NTV's International Reporters Roundtable, more on immigration issues and border security with our panel. Stay tuned.